Thanks very much. And I did again want to extend my thanks to the folks here at Fanshawe for making this venue available to us again. I think it's the 5th or 6th year. Every year we've held it here has been a great turnout, so it is really great to see another good crowd here this evening. A little bit of a special presentation this evening because we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the CANWARN program. It began with Randy Mawson, an Environment Canada employee in the Windsor Weather Office back in the summer of 1987. In the heels of two significant tornadic events in Canada, the large tornadoes in Barrie and Grand Valley in May 31st of 1985, followed by a devastating killer tornado in Edmonton in July of 1987, and Randy decided it would be a logical extension among the amateur radio community to bring them on board in terms of spotting storms and getting information back into the Weather Centre. We also had another group that began in the late 70s called Volunteer Weather Watchers, and we didn't really do any specific training with them. We sent them a booklet and we said, if you see something in this booklet, give us a call. It wasn't really very organized. So when I took over the program from Randy in the early 2000s, we decided to open up the CANWARN umbrella beyond just the amateur radio community to get people from all walks of life involved. Since then, we've seen a lot of organizations, conservation authorities, municipal governments, regional governments, provincial ministries, federal departments want to take the training. It's really worked out well for us because a lot of these folks worked outside and they became extra eyes and ears for Environment Canada. So again, it's really great to be here this evening, 30 years into this program, and now over 6,500 trained spotters across the province of Ontario. And what we're going to be talking about this evening is, well, why is CANWARN still relevant? Because a lot of people are telling me, Jeff, with the age of social media, with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and dozens of reports, hundreds of reports, thousands of reports that you can get, why do you still train people and why do you still need a CANWARN program? Well, one of the reasons I need that is reports like, boy, it's really dark in Peterborough, it's really raining heavily in London, or there's lots of lightning in Sarnia, don't really help the forecasters determine exactly how severe the storms are. And so one of the points of our training is going to be not only to help identify the early stages of some of these strong storms, but to know what types of weather the Weather Centre wants to get reports on, the types of reports that can help them determine how severe a storm is. Next, we'll talk about some definitions, what a thunderstorm is, what a downburst is, what a tornado is, just so we're all on the same level playing field. The basics of thunderstorms, thunderstorms 101, the ingredients they need to form, the types of thunderstorms that there are and the damage they can produce, what to watch for in the sky, what to report back to the Weather Centre and how to get those reports in, and last but not least, the section I consider the most important, weather safety. A number of CANWARN spotters over the years have said to me, well, Jeff, I've been a part of the program for 6 years and I've never had to send you one single report. And I consider that good news for that person because he or she hasn't encountered a storm severe enough to report it in. However, they've used the lightning safety information or the storm safety information to help them determine whether it was time to get indoors and take shelter. So the CANWARN side of it in terms of personal safety and your family's safety continues to be a big part of the program. The program and the presentation itself wouldn't be possible without the cooperation of a number of different organizations and individuals that have been gracious enough to allow me to use some of the images and video that we're going to see this evening to help illustrate some of these concepts. And that includes the National Weather Service in the United States, the Weather Network here in Canada that has been very generous over the years, allowing me to use imagery sent to their image gallery on the Weather Office or the Weather Network website, the engineers here in London at Western University, who for the last decade have accompanied us on post-event storm surveys and helped us to determine the wind speeds involved in events that cause damage to homes and vehicles and trees. And last but not least, a number of CANWARN spotters here in Canada and our sister organization Skywarn in the US for allowing me to use some of their footage to help illustrate some concepts. And it is important to note that your tax dollars are hard at work at the Weather Centre. We do have a lot of technology from the Weather Centre in Toronto to track storms summer and winter as they occur across the province and also as they're occurring in other places, in the provinces to the west of us, in areas in the US and the Midwest and south of the Great Lakes, and also able to track storms coming up the East Coast. All of this technology, radar and satellite and computer weather models, help to give us a good sense that a storm could be severe, but oftentimes the missing ingredient is we don't know what's actually happening at ground level. So we've got a lot of that technology, but where CANWARN comes in is giving us credible reports of what's happening at ground level. And during the course of this evening, we're going to see a number of examples of these rain shafts or hail shafts. The downdraft or sinking part of the storm can be very dark off in the distance. These areas can produce heavy rainfall, large hail, and damaging bursts of wind. And yet, in another part of the same storm, where visibilities are better at the surface, this is the area of inflow and updraft into the storm. And that's an area that a trained spotter would be looking for signs of rotation, perhaps the development of a funnel cloud or a tornado. So as we go through the course of this evening, we're going to see more examples of what's happening at the base and underneath these storms, and that's where our technology really can help us. Our radar beams are somewhere up higher into the storm. Satellite imagery, again, sort of telling us what's happening with the cloud tops, but where we lack information in many cases is real-time reports of what's happening at the ground. So your reports are helping to ground truth what we may suspect from other sources, from Doppler weather radars, from our lightning detection network, and from satellites in space. Now we do have good news in terms of satellite capability. The new generation of GOES satellites was launched by the Americans back last November. That new satellite is in its shakedown phase right now, but one of the things it will be able to give us is a lightning mapper from space. One of the first times we'll have excellent ability to look at not only cloud to ground lightning, but in-cloud lightning and lightning that leaps from one cloud to another. And there's a lot of research saying that changes in the frequency of lightning can be an early indicator of a storm that's about to become severe. Many of our tornadoes here in Ontario are weak and short-lived, and so they are more difficult to detect as opposed to the big tornadoes they can get in places like Kansas and Nebraska and Oklahoma. You're helping to protect not only members of your local community where those storms are occurring, but by giving us these timely and accurate reports, we can then feed that into the warnings for as the storms move downstream. So your reports of what's happening in Middlesex County can help determine what's going to go or be in the warnings for areas in the Brantford area, down towards the Niagara Peninsula, towards the Toronto area, if that's where these storms are moving. And oftentimes we'll use your information to help issue or update existing watches and warnings and actually say a trained CANWARN spotter in the London area has reported Toonie-size hail, or a trained spotter in Peterborough has reported tree damage. All of that adding relevance to the existing warnings and letting people know what those storms have been capable of doing. Now this slide, very important for me personally, because what we're talking about when we talk about CANWARN as a system is spotting storms from a safe distance and a safe location, not getting into armored vehicles and chasing after these things. Now I fully realize some CANWARN members do that. That's obviously a personal choice, but what CANWARN is all about, again, is spotting these storms from a safe distance and a safe location, and if that storm is going to roll over your location, your safety and your family's safety is the primary consideration. We're going to take shelter, let that storm move over us, and then only resume spotting when it's safe to do so. So some definitions now, just so we all understand what we're talking about. When we look at the different types of messaging Environment Canada has at its disposal to let you know when there could be significant weather, there's a variety of statements that the forecaster can use. And these statements are used summer and winter. Special weather statements can be issued hours or even a few days in advance of the storms actually hitting Ontario. So they're used to talk about interesting, noteworthy, or potentially impactful weather that could occur in the coming days. But they're issued for a fairly broad geographic area because we're not quite sure who's going to get hit by the worst of it. Advisories used for specific types of weather. Large areas of dense fog, frost during the growing season for the agricultural community, extensive periods of freezing drizzle that could ice up the roadways, and periods of blowing snow giving us poor visibilities, making it difficult driving conditions. Watches and warnings are reserved year-round for the most significant storms that will cause the most impacts. Watches tending to go out first and talking about the potential for that weather to develop in the coming hours. Warnings going out, again, with differing lead times. Summer lead times for some of these storms. State of the science for tornado warnings, both in the US and Canada, is an average lead time for a tornado warning of only about 10 to 15 minutes. It's not a lot of time right now. And that's why CANWARN reports are helpful at lengthening that lead time for some of these storms. Winter type warnings, the lead time can be a number of hours because we may see these storms coming from the foothills of the Rockies in Alberta, in Colorado, or the Texas Gulf Coast area, and we can see the impacts those storms are having well before they get to Ontario, and therefore get the word out to you. And that's this slide kind of reinforcing the challenge we face in the season that we're now heading into. The thunderstorm season in spring and summer, capable of producing tornadoes and big hail, flash floods and damaging bursts of wind, but from storms that can develop very quickly and move very quickly, and sometimes not allow us a lot of time to give a lead time on the event. Whereas in the winter, when we talk about ice storm events or snow squalls or large-scale snowfall systems coming in from different areas, we can give a longer lead time before those events will actually impact the area. And it's important to note that by definition, all thunderstorms have lightning associated with them, and lightning can kill you. And that's why we're going to spend a lot of time talking about lightning safety towards the end of the presentation. But if Environment Canada issued watches and warnings for every single thunderstorm that we got here in southwestern Ontario, those watches and warnings would go out every other day, and people would start to tune us out. We want to reserve those watches and warnings for the small percentage of thunderstorms that have the greatest possibility of producing notable and significant impacts. But it doesn't negate the danger that any thunderstorm poses, and that's why we want to have a healthy respect for any thunderstorm. Now, what constitutes a severe thunderstorm? What are the characteristics that the meteorologists are looking for? Well, if we think a storm could possess one or more of the following four characteristics, it will be deemed to be severe, and we'll be tracking it with watches and warnings. If we think that storm could produce large hail the size of a nickel or larger, it's severe. Heavy rainfall, but more even than just the downpours that we're getting today, but the potential of getting a month's worth of rain or more in the span of a few hours, causing road washouts and flooded basements. Damaging bursts of wind from some of these storms where the wind gusts get to 90 kilometers an hour or more, and the reason we use that threshold is that's the threshold the engineers have shown us where we start to get notable damage. When those speeds get to 90 kilometers an hour and more, shingles being torn off, branches coming down, and the damage becoming more severe as those wind speeds increase. And last but not least, if we think that storm could produce one or more tornadoes, again, it will be deemed to be severe, and we'll be tracking it closely. Now, many of our severe thunderstorms in an average season present themselves as only one type. One storm capable of just producing big hail, or it's producing lots of rain or damaging winds. But one type of severe thunderstorm called a supercell thunderstorm is capable of producing all four forms of severe weather. And while supercells are the rarest form of thunderstorm, they are the ones responsible for most of the big, significant damaging events that we get in an average season. Now, downbursts, bursts of damaging winds that come out of some of these storms, not very well understood by a lot of folks. I've done many damage surveys over the course of my career. I've talked to Farmer Smith, who had his barn knocked over, had a swath of trees taken out. He wasn't home when the event happened, but he naturally assumes from watching cable television and other sources, it must have been a tornado. So when we explained to him that the damage was relatively broad and most of his damage pushed in one direction, so it was most likely a damaging burst of wind, they always seemed disappointed. So until the Discovery Channel has a show called Downburst Chaser, I think I'm going to be doomed to try to explain these events more and more. But we really have to consider them because we get more of these downburst events in an average year than we do get tornadoes. And the winds involved in many of these events rival the speeds that we're getting in many of our tornadoes. And what's worse, the damage path, as we see here on the top bullet, we can have a width of damage from less than a kilometer, relatively narrow, to a width of damage of over 400 kilometers wide in a massive squall line event or derecho firing off these bursts of damaging winds. Now, at the lower end of the scale of a damaging wind event, something called a microburst, where the wind damage is restricted to an area of less than 4 kilometers in diameter, and the whole event is over in a matter of a few minutes. And the other end of the spectrum, we've got the derecho, a family of organized thunderstorms that feed off each other, can last for many hours, and some derechos have had a length of damage of over 1,000 kilometers from where they started to where they end up, firing off intermittent bursts of wind damage as they go. And as we mentioned, when we look at the damage that these downbursts do, we tend to see it's relatively broad and the damage pushed usually in the direction the storm is moving. So the strongest winds, in this case, if this storm is moving towards me from left to right, we are getting downburst winds in both directions as that downdraft air hits the ground. But if we also add in the speed of motion of the storm, then usually the winds at the front end of the storm are the strongest. And it's almost like a big plow moving through the countryside, knocking things over as it goes. When we talk about tornadoes, we've been inundated with tornadoes. You can watch them every other night on Discovery Channel. They're in movies like Twister. There's been other tornado-based movies since then. We all know rapidly rotating column of air, but the key to the definition of a tornado is there must be evidence of contact with the surface. Now that doesn't mean the funnel has to be visible all the way from the base of the cloud to the ground for it to be a tornado. And a key element that a trained spotter will be looking for is if they see that funnel cloud, which again, rapidly rotating column of air, but we're not sure at that point if there is contact with the surface. So until we're sure, it remains a funnel cloud. But as soon as we've got evidence of contact with the surface, even if that funnel is not coming all the way to the ground, if we see the funnel and we look beneath it and we see an area of swirling dust and debris, it's still a tornado, even though the last part of that funnel may not be visible. A waterspout is any tornado that occurs over a body of water, and we're going to talk a little bit later on about the two main types of waterspouts that we get here in southern Ontario. We use something called the Enhanced Fujita Damage Scale to estimate the winds involved in both downburst events and in tornadoes. Some of these events can be very localized. They occur where we have no wind measuring equipment, or in some cases, if it's a widespread event and it does occur where we have wind measuring equipment, it may damage that equipment by having excessively high wind speeds, and we don't get a true sense of what the peak wind is. So we then rely on the objects that were in the path of the event and the damage that was done to them to estimate those winds. And this is where, again, the engineers here from Western have been invaluable to us, because we've seen some spectacular damage over the years when we go out, and initially we're taken aback and think the winds must have been very strong, but the engineers can show that perhaps the joins between the roof and the walls weren't very strong. Perhaps that tree was rotting from the inside, wasn't as robust as we would have thought. The lowest end of the damage scale is a so-called EF0 event with peak winds to 130 kilometers an hour. A well-built home will have siding damage, shingle damage done to it, but nothing too excessive. When we look at the tree damage in the case of these events, if it's a shallow-rooted tree in wet soil, they can be uprooted in an EF0 event. EF1 level events, now the peak winds up to 175 kilometers an hour, a well-built home sustaining more significant damage, partial roof removal, probably a number of broken windows and other damage, and large swaths of trees can be snapped or uprooted by winds of these speeds. Moving up to EF2 on the scale, and some examples of what EF2 level damage looks like. This was a tornado that struck the Midland area, southeast of Georgian Bay, back in June of 2010. Dramatic evidence showing that these camper trailers and fifth wheels are not providing us any protection whatsoever in these higher rated wind events. Knocked off their foundations, ripped on the side by flying debris. And also these pictures demonstrate the real concern that we have in these events, both downbursts and tornadoes. The power of the wind is important, but what that wind is carrying is even more important. If we're caught outside and there's debris such as wood and metal and brick flying around at incredible speeds, it's like projectiles and bullets, and we're very vulnerable out there. Fortunately, most of this trailer park was not inhabited at the time. June 23rd, I believe, was a Wednesday. School ended that year on the Friday the 25th. That weekend coming up, the weekend of the 25th, 26th, 27th, would have seen this trailer park much more populated with a much higher chance of injuries and fatalities from this event. EF3 level events. The last EF3 level event we've had 5.5 years ago, the Goderich tornado, August 21st of 2011. A massive supercell thunderstorm tornado as it came on shore from Lake Huron, went right through the heart of town. Anyone that's been to Goderich since has seen the amazing job they've done of rebuilding the town square, but the one thing they can't replace is the massive number of mature trees that used to be right in the heart of the town, which now they've done a great job of replanting. Those trees will grow, but it will be years before they'll be the canopy that it was before the tornado hit. At the higher end of the EF3 scale, winds getting to 250, 260 kilometers an hour, vehicles can now become airborne in these situations, as some of these vehicles were moved around in the town square. Buildings, well-constructed buildings, total roof removal, one or more walls coming down with winds of this speed. This church had to be demolished because the damage was so excessive. Now, everything we've seen on the scale up to this point, EF0, EF1, EF2, and EF3, all can be caused both by downbursts and by tornadoes. But the top two levels of the scale, so-called EF4 and EF5 level events, are the sole domain of tornadoes. Only tornadoes produce winds this strong. The last EF4 level events in Ontario, May 31st, 1985, a generation ago, pretty much. We had 12 fatalities, dozens of injuries, and hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. And yet, when we talked about the damage path of downbursts, we mentioned they can be actually quite broad, in some cases hundreds of kilometers across. What we find with tornadoes, even the very high-end tornadoes, is how narrow the damage path can be. Along that path of damage, utter destruction for an EF4, well-constructed buildings severely damaged or reduced to the foundation. And yet just to the north and just to the south of the damage track, minimal damage. So my colleagues back 30 some odd years ago doing the damage survey for this event were stunned to realize that one side of a street could be devastated while the other side had barely any damage to speak of. So focused damage, intense damage, but it tends to be long and narrow when we're talking about a tornado. Peak winds now in excess of 300 kilometers an hour. Vehicles can be airborne for great distances, and most structures will be leveled to the ground from these winds. An EF5 level event, the highest end the scale goes to, we've only had one confirmed EF5 in Canada, and that was the Eli tornado, end of June of 2007, where again, peak winds now in excess of 315 kilometers an hour. The homes and structures not only gone, but the contents of the foundation, the basements, sucked out along with it. So even if we take shelter in the basement, which is where we're supposed to be for these events, it's quite possible you will die if you take a direct hit from a EF5 level event. Now we've had one confirmed EF5 in Canada, but to contrast that, in the United States, each year they get a handful of EF5 level events in Tornado Alley, down in the American Southwest or up into the American Midwest. In Canada, we get about 60 to 80 tornadoes every year. In the United States, they can get upwards of 1,200 tornadoes every year. A much bigger problem, and they get a lot more big tornadoes. Now, in this video that we've shown over the years, a couple of things to point out again. As the video starts, we're going to see a farmhouse destroyed just behind this white building, chunks of roof and wall flying through the air. And as the camera's going to pull back, we'll watch to the right of the building and see a vehicle go arcing through the air. So there goes the building, totally destroyed as we see here. Huge amounts of debris being generated. And as the camera pulls back, there's our vehicle flying through the air. So again, the amazing story about Eli, and we've told this story over the years at training things, but it does bear repeating. This was Canada's biggest, most violent tornado, and yet there was not one single injury, one single fatality. And one of the reasons for that was June 22nd of 2007 was the high school graduation ceremony. A lot of folks in the community were at the high school having a son or daughter graduate or a friend of the family graduate. The high school was not struck by the tornado, and yet as these folks went home afterwards, some of them, this is what greeted them in terms of what was left of their homes and their contents of those homes scattered over a large area. Now last year, our biggest event was actually on August 24th of last year, a very sudden developing storm, a humbling experience for the Weather Service, and again showed how far we still have to go to be able to forecast these tornadoes in advance. During the evening hours, just before 7 p.m., a number of showers had developed in southeastern lower Michigan to the west of LaSalle in extreme southwestern Ontario. None of these echoes on radar were exhibiting much intensity. There was no lightning from any of the shower cells in this area, but as one of the cells crossed the Detroit River, it exploded in intensity, suddenly had lightning involved in it, and suddenly was capable of producing an EF1 tornado in LaSalle. Social media went nuts, and then minutes later, another tornado, EF2, struck in the Windsor area. And again, fortunately in these cases, no serious injuries and no fatalities, but also no warning. The Environment Canada tornado warning went out minutes after the event happened in Windsor. Again, trying to keep track of what was happening in social media, trying to keep track of the storms as they blew up so suddenly, had us behind the 8 ball, and by the time the word got out, again, the event was pretty much over with. So we've done some improvements since then in terms of the way we monitor social media. We've also had some improvements in terms of the amount and type of products we're getting from Detroit Radar, which is the key radar to forecast for southwestern Ontario. And with those changes, we feel more confident now. I don't know if we'd be able to provide much lead time on an event of this nature again, but at least we should be able to respond to the actual reports coming in and fire out a warning more rapidly. So at least there would have been maybe a bit of notice for the Windsor event. Now, when we talk about seasonal variation for when these strong thunderstorms and tornadoes can occur, this graph is a dramatic reason why we do the training at this time of year in southwestern Ontario. That as we head into the months of May, June, July, and August, those are the peak months for strong thunderstorms and tornadoes. So giving you the training now, going to allow you to go out there in the coming days and weeks and maybe see some of these features that we're going to be talking about this evening. And that's why we hold the training for Northern Ontario a little bit later, more into late May and early June, because the season takes a little bit longer to get going in Northern Ontario. We've used this video over the years as well to demonstrate a couple of concepts. Again, first and foremost, we don't need to have that funnel visible all the way to the ground for it to be a tornado, and we're definitely going to see that here. And also, again, the dangers of chasing these storms because of a sudden appearance and sometimes an erratic nature in the storms. And as we've said over the years, this boyfriend-girlfriend chaser team, a little bit of friction in the relationship as this thing evolves, and so we're going to hear that as it plays out.
Did you see above our heads? Look above.
Sorry.
Look above you, right here.
Look at that.
Just going to pause the video there for a moment to put it into context again. So what we've got is we're parked our vehicle along this muddy road facing what this thing actually appears, this dust ball. This rapidly rotating area of dust and debris is in fact the surface contact of a tornado. At this point in time, we can't see a funnel visible above it, but there is no doubt we're dealing with a tornado at this point, even though there's no funnel visible above.
Oh my God! He's got the shot. Shoot!
I'm shooting.
Good.
Dude, look at the funnel.
So now the funnel is becoming more visible above it as we've got picking up more dust and debris, and that funnel goes all the way up to the base of the cloud.
Oh my God! Look at the funnel. This is incredible. We're backing up.
We are.
So they're finally backing up.
He's going to
Which
be right in the
is certainly a
middle
good
of that.
Backing up. Oh my God! Are you getting this, Katie?
I'm getting it.
I gotta get some shots. Hang on.
Ow!
Sorry.
So that's when he steps on her to get out of the car to keep filming this thing. Now the concern would be, as we stop the vehicle again, we're filming this again. Fortunately for these folks, the tornado continued to move mostly to the right. If it had changed direction, if it had come down that road towards them, not a lot of good choices. Our car's pointing the wrong way. It's pointing towards this thing. We'd have to try to back up pretty quickly on a muddy road and maybe lose control. Some of these tornadoes can move at speeds of 60, 70, 80 kilometers an hour. You'd have a hard time outracing it. You might try to do a quick three-point turn with the car and get it going in the right way, but again, that takes time. So a potentially dangerous situation. Over the years, I've been led to believe there was actually somebody in this white car. I don't know if they're the soundest sleeper of anybody I've ever heard of. Maybe somebody that was maybe too shocked to do much about it, seeing this thing form almost in front of them. But fortunately, again, nobody hurt in this event. Now, when we look at the hourly variation, when is it most likely during the day that these storms are going to occur? It's the afternoon and early evening hours, because in many of our storms, the sun plays a big role. The sun warming the earth in turn warming the air above it, that air starting to rise, and that can help accentuate the process for storm development. But having said that, we do also get storms that don't necessarily rely on the sun cycle. Storms that can occur in the early morning hours, storms that can occur late at night, and again just past midnight. The particular danger with these storms occurring in the overnight hours is you can't see. There's no visual clues to tell you what's going on outside. You can hear maybe the howling of the wind and the breaking of trees. When we've done post-event investigations after nocturnal storms, obviously we're not going to find eyewitnesses, but we are going to find people who maybe experienced or had a close encounter with the storm. Now, I would expect to hear if somebody is telling me that they were woken up from a sound sleep at 3 in the morning with sounds like the roof wanted to lift off the house. What I hope to hear is I grabbed the wife and kids and we got into the basement. But many times what we actually hear, and again it's 3 in the morning, well, what did you do? I went to the window to see if I could see what was happening. Now we're going to the window, we're pressing our nose against glass where there could be 2x4s flying around outside in that yard that we're not aware of. So again, we've got to fight that level of curiosity and say we have to do the safe thing. In the same way, we've got YouTube filled with people using their smartphones to film these events and somehow believing by sticking a smartphone in front of your face, you've got a force field that's going to protect you. You put the phone away, you're in danger. You put the phone in front of you, I'm just filming. We've got a lot of footage of people filming these things coming down the street towards them, spitting wood and brick and metal, and they somehow believe that they're not going to be hurt. Well, that's certainly not going to be the case. Again, fortunately, in many of these cases, people do escape without being harmed, but the longer we stay out there, the longer we're allowing our curiosity to override our natural instinct to take shelter, the more chance there is of something bad happening. Now, when we talk about these events in the province of Ontario, our season tends to run from late April to early October. We can get storms that are severe before that. We can get storms well into November and December in some years. So that's just a ballpark time frame. Same with the numbers. A real rough estimate here because we get a lot of variability from year to year in terms of the types of storms we get and in terms of the number. So about 80 to 110 events in an average season, and of that, 40 to 50 are damaging wind events, or downbursts, straight line winds, microbursts, whatever we want to call them. Those bursts of damaging wind tend to be the most frequent. 10 to 15 heavy rain or flash flooding events in an average year, 15 to 25 big hail events, and about 12 tornadoes. And the tornado number a little more specific because Dr. David Sills at Environment Canada has dedicated most of his career with Environment Canada in terms of cataloging tornadoes across Canada and in particular in Ontario. So that number 12 represents about a 30-year average for tornadoes here in the province over the last 3 decades. But again, we can get a lot of variability. Some years we can get 20 plus tornadoes, some years we get 6. So again, it varies from year to year. Now in this section we're going to look at the conditions that we need for thunderstorms to form, the kinds of thunderstorms that there are, and the types of damaging weather that they can produce. Every single thunderstorm, whether it's going to be severe or not, needs these 3 ingredients. We need a good supply of low-level moisture. That's the fuel that drives these storms. Now, in many cases, our fuel is coming from the Gulf of Mexico. A wind from the south coming up into the Great Lakes Basin, bringing with it hot, hazy, and humid air. And that is, again, the fuel these things need to survive. An unstable atmosphere, which is a fancy way of saying that if I gave a kick to a parcel of air near the ground, that parcel of air is going to want to rise, and in some cases it's going to want to rise violently. Updrafts can attain speeds of 100, 150, 200 kilometers an hour, bringing that warm, moist air up into the storm. And as that warm, moist air rises, it cools, it condenses. We have creation of large raindrops, large hail particles, big snowflakes as we go high up into the storm. And eventually that precipitation becomes very heavy and it starts to fall down through the storm in the downdraft. So the downdraft, the sinking motion, represents our rain shaft, our hail shaft, or in some cases where those downburst winds are rushing down towards the ground. The last ingredient we need is a spark or a kicker to get the whole thing going. And that can be a cold front, a wedge of cool air sliding along the ground, causing that warm, moist air to rise. Or in particular here in southwestern Ontario, lake breezes coming in from the various Great Lakes and meeting in different places. Coming inland from Lake Erie and Lake Ontario and Lake Huron and Lake St. Clair. And when those breezes collide with other breezes further inland, they can cause the air to rise, and that's another lifting mechanism that can get the process going. We've seen many examples over the course of a summer afternoon where if you look along the shoreline of the Great Lakes, it's a beautiful summer day. The sun is out, there's no clouds. We go a little further inland, 10, 12, 14 kilometers inland, and that's where the lake breeze is meeting the other breezes. Suddenly we've got a line of showers and thunderstorms parking themselves inland and causing problems. Now the spectrum of thunderstorm types, we're going to talk about them individually, but it's important to note that even if a storm started as a certain type, it can morph into another type during its lifespan. It's not locked into being a single cell storm, or it's not locked into being a multi-cell type storm. They can morph into supercells in some cases. So what we've got, the simplest type of thunderstorm, the single cell, one main updraft goes up, one main downdraft comes down. It's a very simple storm. The whole process from birth to maturity to death lasts about 30 to 45 minutes. This is the type of storm we would see then. That main updraft is our bright white billowing cloud, bringing that fuel up high into the atmosphere. The multi-cell storms, again, multiple updrafts feed the storm, multiple downdrafts come out of the storm, and they are a more moderate threat for severe weather than the single cell. Single cell can produce some severe weather, a quick downburst, a quick shot of hail, But for the most part, as we get into the multi-cell type storms, they last longer and they have more potential for severe weather. And then the granddaddy of all, the rarest type of thunderstorm, but the one that is responsible for the vast majority of our big events, the supercell storms. They also have multiple updrafts feeding the storm, but the main updraft in the supercell may actually be rotating slowly as it goes up. So the dynamics to produce all forms of severe weather are more present in the supercell than the other storm types. Now, from a distance, this remains still one of my favorite images of the whole session, because a trained spotter can take a lot of information out from this supercell thunderstorm and learn about it from a distance. So a pair of binoculars is still a spotter's best friend, where we can be in a safe location and still make out a lot of these features. Now, this particular image taken a number of kilometers to the south of the storm. We're looking at the western flank of the storm here, the eastern flank over here, and that whole storm moving left to right in front of me. Now, in the updraft area where we have the red arrow, we notice the updraft is a little tilted over, indicating the winds are stronger aloft than they are near the ground. Another indication of the power of the updraft is, again, we look at the appearance. Bright white, lumpy, like cauliflower or white knuckles. And another indication of its power, it's actually punching some cloud material above the normal top of the storm. So it's an overshooting top. If that overshooting top persists for a number of minutes, again, an indication of a strong storm. Now, the anvil cloud is the flat top cloud that we see at the upper reaches of the storm. Most of that anvil cloud is blowing off with the strong winds in the atmosphere at that height, and those winds are again blowing left to right. So most of the anvil ends up over here. But as another testament to how strong the updraft is, it's actually, as it forces air upwards, forcing some of that cloud back against the strong winds and forming something here called the back-sheared anvil, another indication of good storm structure. Now, underneath that strong updraft, if we get some other ingredients coming together, we may get rotation forming. So as a trained spotter, it's underneath the updraft area that we're looking for the possibility of rotation, funnel cloud development, or maybe even a tornado. Now, in the blue arrow, the sinking motion, that's our downdraft. And that's where the rain, the hail, and perhaps the strong winds are coming out of the storm. Now, people are saying to me, well, what's a good vantage point for one of these storms? Well, certainly this is a good example of a spotter in a good location. He can look at the storm, see a lot of features of the storm, but he's not involved in any of the dangerous parts coming out of the storm. It's going to keep moving left to right in front of him, and he's in a good spot. If I was a spotter in this area here, close to where that downdraft is, I'm in a bad location because I'm in an area where the rain, maybe some hail, strong winds are coming out of the storm. I can't see very well. And this area, the updraft area, is moving towards me, may contain a tornado, and I may not realize that until it's pretty much on top of me. Now, to complicate matters further, this is a good example of kind of a prairie or Great Plains supercell. We have pretty good visibility in the lower levels of the atmosphere. We can see all the storm structure very well. A complicating factor here in Ontario is sometimes you don't have to only deal with this one downdraft at the front of the storm. We can get a second downdraft that wraps around, the rear flank downdraft, comes around behind the storm here, and if it wraps all the way around the storm, that storm becomes rain-wrapped, and we can't see the updraft area, we can't see the tornado in that area. It's being obscured to us. This was exactly the case for the Goderich tornado. It was a massive rain-wrapped supercell that came inland from Lake Huron. People on the beach that saw that storm only knew it looked really bad by how dark it was. And then some people noticed that there were sheets of rain rotating slowly around it. But they did not see a tornado as it made landfall. But it was most certainly there, as we saw evidence from what happened in the town square. When we look at these updrafts, this is another great key for a spotter to get a sense of, is this a storm I should be watching more closely, or is this one that still may be in the early stages of development, or perhaps going to stay on the weak side? If that updraft tends to be straight up and down, if the updraft appearance, there's a few bumps and lumps in it, but it doesn't look all that muscular or vigorous, then this may be a storm, again, in the early stages of development, or one that may never amount to anything really significant. Some examples then where these updrafts are still developing, we see these two thunderheads, these two thunderstorms that are forming. The anvil clouds themselves still kind of small. The updraft, again, there is some lumps and bumps in it, but it doesn't look really super vigorous. So these, again, could be developing storms or storms that are going to stay on the weak side. Now, that's not to say that they each couldn't be producing lightning, and we're still going to have to give some respect for that. So we may say there's very little chance of, say, flash flooding or downbursts or big hail from events like this. But if there's lightning involved, we still need to take precautions. When we see an updraft like this one, though, tilted over as it's rising up from the ground, a much more vigorous appearance to it, a lot more lumpy, bumpy than some of those other examples. Another good vantage point for us, if we happen to be on the back end, so this storm is actually moving off to the left, I can see underneath the base where that strong updraft is, bringing in the warm, moist air, and I can be looking for, again, that rotation that may be indicative of a funnel cloud forming or a tornado forming, and I'm in a good spot because that whole storm is moving away. But if I was on the other side of the storm, and this storm is coming towards me this way, again, I'm in a bad place because I could be in the downdraft here, poor visibility, I don't know what's coming, so I may be putting myself in a dangerous situation. So there are certain situations you're going to find yourself in a good spotting location, other ones maybe not so good, and you're going to need to be ready to take shelter if the storm approaches. When we talked about the single cell storm, we look at the lifestyle or the life cycle of the single cell storm. Begins its life where inside the cloud itself, mostly rising motion, and we see sort of a cotton ball, puffy, cumulus type of cloud in the early stages. As this system reaches maturity, we see the updraft looking much more vigorous at the mature stage, the downdraft, the dark area here off to the right now forming, and so again, we're bringing in the warm, moist air. We've got hail and raindrops and snowflakes getting heavier and bigger in the upper parts of the storm, and eventually start falling through the storm in the downdraft. When we get to the dying stages of the storm, the downdraft now dominates, and by that downdraft dominating, it's effectively choked off the warm, moist air this storm needs to live. So we've got this cool air spreading out all around, no more warm air to feed the storm, and right away we look at the appearance of that in the dissipating stage, much more fuzzy, wispy, and indistinct. So we've gone from very vigorous to something that looks much weaker and is much weaker. This cloud is becoming glaciated. It's mostly just ice crystals now in the upper parts of the storm cloud, and the worst is over. So from birth to maturity to death, we can see this with the naked eye with single cell storms in the span of 30 to 45 minutes, and again, usually just a small chance of it producing severe weather. Now, multi-cell storms, instead of one main up, one main downdraft coming down, we have multiple updrafts feeding the system, multiple downdrafts coming out of it, and as long as the ingredients are there, as long as we've got moisture and instability and lift going on, then this thing can keep drawing in more moisture, more updrafts, more storm potential. And so these storms can go on for a much longer period of time, and they have more potential to be severe. We also notice the appearance of the clouds. In the developing updrafts, kind of the puffy cotton ball, there is still some lumpy nature to it. The biggest updraft, the most mature one, is the most vigorous looking with the highest top. And then as we start to get into the downdraft area, again we notice the more fuzzy and indistinct nature of the clouds as it begins to glaciate in this area. Now this video we started using last year, very instructive in showing us a multi-cell thunderstorm. And these multi-cell storms are the most common. What we're going to see during the course of the video is new updrafts to the left, mature updrafts in the middle, and then the downdrafts starting to dominate on the right. We see them bubble up. Again, the most powerful ones, and then we see the downdraft over here. Now, what we also note is, during the course of this video, the updraft area, the downdraft area, don't seem to be moving very much. So the winds in the mid-levels of the atmosphere may be weak on this day. There's not a big push on this storm, so this could be a classic situation of a flash flood, where we're getting redevelopment continually over the same area. The downdraft area remains over the roughly the same area. Large amounts of precipitation falling in a short period of time, and that's what leads to our flash flood events. Now, it's sped up with respect to the time lapse, but these more vigorous multi-cell storms, we can see these updrafts growing. We can see the dissipation or the fuzzy nature of the downdraft with the naked eye on some of these storms. Now, if we take a bunch of these multi-cell storms and we have them in an organized line that stretches across much of the western horizon, these squall lines or gust fronts can extend for hundreds of kilometers and cover that whole western sky. These are sometimes called worst first storms because they hit you with everything bad they've got right at the leading edge of the storm. So in this particular image on the left-hand side here, we're looking down on the squall line from above. The heaviest rain and strongest winds are at the leading edge. The rain gets lighter and the winds drop off as we get further behind into the squall line. We also note that we've reversed the relationship between the updraft and the downdraft in storms like this. In the supercell examples we've seen previous to this, the updraft was back here on the western side and the downdraft was here on the eastern side. We've switched that relationship because what's happening is a series of downdrafts in these storms now acting like a plow as that cold air drives into the warm moist air and that warm moist air is forced to rise. So new development actually in the eastern side of these storms and the downdraft dominating on the western side. Where the downdraft and the updraft meet, intense turbulence can be occurring and sometimes a wedge-shaped cloud known as a shelf cloud can develop right along that leading edge. Now this area in an average summer will see a number of gust fronts and squall lines. We'll see them move in from the west, but not many of them will attain severe proportions. We'll still get a blast of cool wind from a number of them, a rapid temperature drop, but in many cases these gust fronts and squall lines will produce winds of say 60, 70, maybe 80 kilometers an hour, just below our severe threshold. But a few times every year, that gust front or squall line will be strong enough that it will generate winds of 100, 120, 140 kilometers an hour. And if those winds are extended through enough of these storms along the leading edge, a wide swath of damage can result. And since there's no easy way to say, I'm seeing the squall line coming, this dark line of clouds or this wedge-shaped cloud is approaching me, we need to be ready to take shelter for any of these events because there's going to be no telltale sign that says this particular one could have winds that could do a lot of damage. What we're going to see then as these squall lines approach, there's our shelf cloud, the wedge of cool air coming down. This whole system is coming out of the screen towards us and actually was from Tiverton last August where it came in off Lake Huron. And the dark area that we're seeing under the wedge-shaped cloud is the rain and maybe hail coming out of that storm. And how dark that area is may be an indication of how heavy the rain is. And obviously it looks pretty dark under this particular squall line. Another example from the Toronto area back in August of 2015, there's our wedge-shaped shelf cloud. The dark conditions in behind it, again indicative of the rain or maybe hail coming out of it, and it's literally coming out of the screen towards us. As this approaches, we could get buffeted by the winds first, and then a combination of strong winds and rain as the squall line moves overhead. And then to show that it's not just Southern Ontario that gets these events, we had a shelf cloud situation back in August of 2015 up in northwestern Ontario in Thunder Bay. Again, the wedge-shaped cloud that we see here, this one also coming out of the screen, and in behind it here, the dark sheets of rain that are going to be accompanying the passage of that shelf cloud. Now, when we get to supercells, we mentioned that they are the rarest form of thunderstorm, but the one that is responsible for most of the damaging weather that we get. Multiple updrafts in the supercell, but the main updraft usually tilted over and that updraft rotating as it goes up into the storm. Capable of lasting many hours as long as the environment continues to be right. There's lots of moisture, instability, and lift, and capable of producing big hail, strong downbursts, lots of rain, and our most significant tornadoes. From a distance, a couple of key things that we're looking at, most of our weather comes from the west. So the northwest, the west, or southwest quadrants. As trained spotters on many days, we'll be using radar and other things on smartphone applications or websites to know where these storms are coming from. But if we know there's a storm coming, oftentimes these supercells will dominate the surroundings. And one of the reasons for that is they demand so much of that warm, moist air to stay alive that they literally suck the life out of the smaller clouds that we may see surrounding it. And these smaller clouds may wither and die in favor of the continued growth of the supercell. A couple of features that we see in this image that make it really stand out. Again, the lumpy, bumpy nature of the main updraft, again, very, very evident. And a sharp, crisp, and well-defined anvil cloud, another indication of good storm structure. Inside the supercell, this is what's going on. Now, when we talked about gust fronts and squall lines, we mentioned that they hit you with everything they've got that's bad right on the leading edge. That first burst of wind and rain, probably the worst it's got. When we talk about supercell storms, though, we talk about them being, in some cases, worst last. They can still have lots of nasty weather at the leading edge, and as we saw with gust fronts and squall lines, supercells also can have a shelf cloud at the leading edge of the storm. That shelf cloud could be accompanied by damaging winds. We could also get flooding rains and big hail soon to follow, all in that downdraft area. And then by the time we get to the back end of the storm, things start to improve with respect to precipitation, but that's when we can get this lowering called a wall cloud. It may be rotating, and then in fact seeing the funnel cloud or tornado beneath it, all linked in again with this main updraft area. The other important thing about this graphic is the scale, and that's why again spotting these tornadoes, unless you're really up close and it's kind of dangerous, can be problematic. The parent storm can be a number of kilometers across and easily spotted. The wall cloud may be a kilometer or two in diameter, so still a notable feature. But look at the size of the tornado in relation to the parent storm. And again, that's why it can be difficult. The other issue we've got, again, as we talked about earlier, not just one downdraft to deal with in many of our supercells in Ontario, but a second downdraft that may be wrapping around the storm and obscuring what's happening in this updraft area. So again, once we get involved in heavy rain and wind and hail, and we don't know where the core of the storm is, we should be taking shelter because we don't know what could be coming. Now, in this time lapse from Lubbock, Texas, a few years ago, we're going to see initially a multi-cell thunderstorm, many updrafts feeding the storm. But as the video plays out, one updraft is going to dominate at the back end or the west end of the storm, and that's going to make this thing a supercell. It's going to be one that basically is going to last for a number of hours. So this time lapse is starting during the morning hours. We're going to go through the afternoon, again still as a multi-cell storm, but as we get to late afternoon and evening, again that one updraft in this area here is going to start to dominate. Now the photographer here in an excellent position because the storm is actually moving away, and we're actually able to see the back end of the storm as it moves into the screen or to the left. So underneath some of these powerful updrafts is again where we'd be looking for signs of rotation, the funnel cloud or the tornado. So now we're getting into late afternoon and the evening hours. We're starting to see this one main updraft starting to dominate, and as the time lapse continues to play out, we're also starting to see an anvil cloud forming as well. Now this sense of growth and power is accentuated under time lapse, but in some of these more vigorous supercell storms, we can see this growth with the naked eye. Again, as it's moving away, excellent vantage point for this photographer. It's underneath this area here that we would probably be in danger of developing rotation and a funnel cloud or tornado. We're now getting into the nighttime, and this thing is still going. So this event has lasted already something like 12 to 15 hours, and that storm is still continuing. So multiple hours, as long as the ingredients are there. We're seeing overshooting tops now developing out of this thing. Very, very impressive storm, and now we're well into the night with it. So long-lived and potentially very, very dangerous. So in this section, we're going to take a look at downbursts and hail and flooding rains in a little bit more detail. And then we'll take our 15-minute break at the halfway point. And when we come back from that, we'll talk more about tornadoes. Now, when we talk about these downbursts, I want to use this time lapse. And what we're going to see is a squall line basically coming from out of the screen towards us. And as this squall line develops and approaches, cool air coming out of it is going to generate a shelf cloud. And then eventually we're going to see wind and rain striking the camera as it approaches and rolls over it. So initially we've got the clouds moving in. We're sped up obviously with the time lapse. And as time goes on, we start to see the beginnings of a shelf cloud developing here. And underneath that shelf cloud, we're going to look for the dust and debris being picked up by the winds. Initially it's just dust and debris, but eventually it's going to combine with rain. And we see how quickly the visibility starts to deteriorate in basically waves of wind and rain as that squall line moves through. Yeah?
Sorry, how much time has passed in this video?
This would probably be, I would imagine, somewhere between 4 to 6 hours from it at the horizon to actually rolling over our position. But even that can vary quite dramatically. Some squall lines can move at speeds of 100 kilometers an hour and move very quickly from the horizon to your position. Other ones somewhat more slowly. But really the dramatic drop in visibility is something that we see in this area a number of times in a given summer. So we do get a lot of these squall lines and gust fronts, but fortunately only a handful each year reach severe proportions. Now this is just a quick video showing the dangers of these downburst events. And again, when I talk to a lot of people, the assumption is when we see events like this occurring, well, it must have been a tornado. This was in fact though a downburst event. That downburst was estimated to be at a speed of about 150 kilometers an hour. Fortunately took the Blues Fest stage and blew it away from the audience because the audience had the wind at their back as it moved through and it blew it away. But if it had been different, this could have been a much more tragic event. So again, in a matter of seconds, with the way the stage is put together, not a lot of flow through to allow the winds to flow through it. It acted almost like a big sail, a high profile, somewhat flimsy structure. Those 150 kilometer-hour winds blow it and knock it over quite quickly. And yet the more stable and based closer to the ground monitor actually not affected by this event. So different terms in terms of how well it was anchored, how well the structure or the amount of surface area to the wind, and we had a very large and high profile surface area with the stage itself, and it led to its rapid collapse. And we've used this video over the years to demonstrate hail. Still one of the best examples I've seen of how an intense hailstorm, one that may only last a few minutes, but if there's a lot of large hail involved, ping pong ball, golf ball size hail, we can be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of crop damage, vehicle damage, and building damage from this video. And as you guys who attended the session before know, we've dubbed this video the poor man's jacuzzi for obvious reasons. So the hail's coming down pretty hard at this point. We're going to pan over to the house and you see there's almost enough hail to coat the ground. But the storm is actually even going to intensify further. As the camera pulls back to the pool, the sky's really over and up and you can hear it. So it really doesn't take a meteorologist to tell you that if something like this happens, again in the span of 10 or 15 minutes, we can be talking about significant damage. Crops being shredded, vehicles being dented, windows being broken by hail of this intensity. It doesn't need to last long, but if the intensity is there, it's really problematic. Every year for the last 4 or 5 years, I've said I'm going to take this video out. Every year I try to do that, somebody says, what happened to the guy in the car? So I put it back in. This again is a gentleman, I do not know him, but he obviously loved his car so much that he went outside to protect it from a hailstorm, and this is what it looked like. Now again, I don't know this gentleman, but I can certainly attest to his high level of pain threshold. As this video goes on for a number of minutes, we're talking about again some golf ball size hail that's pummeling him. Another note that I've made over the years is I do not claim to be a social anthropologist or an expert in human behavior, but I will say that the vast majority of videos that I get sent to me of people doing stuff like this involves a man as opposed to a woman. And my wife has never been surprised at that statistic. But it also speaks, I think, too, again, the concern here is you're getting somebody doing this, and obviously the video was popular, the number of hits, things like that, but again, this is a dangerous situation. Not only being struck by the hail, but this storm is probably also generating lightning as well, which could be problematic. And now the power of water itself, in terms of the skepticism that I get doing a damage survey when we talk about damaging bursts of wind versus a tornado, where most people just don't believe me. They're going to say it was a tornado regardless. We also want to talk about the power of water, something a lot of people take for granted as well. What's the big deal? Water can't be that much of a problem. And yet, if the water is flowing strong enough, that water only needs to be about 15 centimeters or 6 inches deep, and it could sweep you off your feet. If you hit your head on the way down and you're knocked senseless, you can drown in the 6 inches of water. Flash flood situation a year ago in the state of Texas, where a number of dry riverbeds became raging torrents of water after a series of thunderstorms, and people not realizing it, driving into some of these situations and being swept away and drowned. So I really want to emphasize the power of this water, and this is again something we've used over the years. Finch Avenue in Toronto at the north end of the city, a major east-west road. We had a lot of rain fall to the north of the road, and that rainwater was working its way towards Lake Ontario. So this area wasn't even where the heaviest rain fell, but that water has to go somewhere. And as a raging torrent, it went under the road under this small culvert that wasn't able to control the flow. Minutes later, it just looked like a big puddle, but fortunately the police had closed off the road here and closed off the road there as well. I envisioned somebody saying, well, honey, I'm sure we'll be fine. It looks like a big puddle, probably just up to the hubcaps, and we really need to get over here where the Joneses are having that barbecue, so we'll just take our time and go through. Now, the flash flood safety rule says if you encounter something like this, an area of flooded road where the water is either moving or even just stationary, if you don't know how deep the water is, if you don't know the condition of the road underneath it, the flash flood safety rule is turn around, don't drown. Now, minutes later, we can see that there was no road underneath that large puddle. and that as time went on, it gouged out an even bigger piece of the roadbed. Now, the damage was so extensive that it took the City of Toronto 10 full months to get all the repairs done to this 4-lane piece of road. The impacts from the event, initially, it only took moments to do this damage, but some of the businesses in this area had impacts during the course of the 10 months to repair it because people could no longer get to their favorite deli or grocery store. They shopped elsewhere. And so there were economic impacts that went on and reverberated long after the event was over. Now, when we talk about these flash flood events, these are events that are happening anywhere in the province. And we've had a number of large urban flood events in the last 5 or 6 years. City of Toronto in July of 2013, hundreds of millions of dollars of insurable losses. August 2014 in Burlington, a number of homeowners not able to recover the loss to their home because it was overland flooding. Most of our flood insurance in Canada back in 2014 covered you if the water came up through the storm drain in the floor. If the water came through the windowsills, you were out of luck. September, just of last year, in the Windsor area, between the 28th and 30th of September, multiple bands of rain, a couple of 100 millimeters of rain in some areas, and again, well over $100 million of insurable losses in the city of Windsor. And in that event in Windsor, it wasn't just a localized thunderstorm that kind of locked in. It was a larger scale weather pattern where a stalled low pressure system south of Lake Erie stayed in that area for a couple of days, and waves of moisture came up from the Gulf of Mexico and smacked into parts of Essex County. Now, the heaviest rain fell between the evening of the 28th and the morning of the 29th, and the total for the airport for the whole event was about 111 millimeters. But in the Tecumseh area, about 8 kilometers to the northeast of the airport along the south shore of Lake St. Clair, we had volunteer observers that reported upwards of 200 millimeters from this same event. So just in the span of a few kilometers, lots more rain fell, and the impacts were significant. And what we had, here was our low pressure system that locked in on the Indiana-Ohio border, and here's Essex County. So we had counterclockwise rotation around that low, bringing up those waves of moisture, impacting that area repeatedly over a number of hours. And what we had was flooded roads, flooded basements, and again, very happy that we had this volunteer network of observations where the airport site, which is around here, was our official observation site, but the cluster of volunteers in the Tecumseh area got significantly more. And again, the distance was not very great, but that localized area pummeled repeatedly during the course of this event. So a lot of impacts in this part of the city of Windsor from this event. So as we get into the second part of the training, what we want to start off with is a discussion of the tornado family and the fact that not all tornadoes are created equally. Now certainly with the explosion of cable television, with the explosion of social media and storm chasers, lots of opportunity to see very impressive supercell type tornadoes, and that's certainly what dominates on things like YouTube and cable television and in the movies. And these supercell tornadoes, often very impressive looking with well-shaped funnels or even wedge-shaped tornadoes capable of producing significant damage. And we certainly do get a few supercell tornadoes every year in the province of Ontario, but we also get a second type known as non-supercell tornadoes. So they don't need that big parent thunderstorm to form. These so-called non-supercell tornadoes or landspouts have a different formation mechanism, a different appearance that we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. And then last but not least, waterspouts. As we mentioned earlier, any tornado that moves out over a body of water, but there are also two main types of waterspouts. Supercell waterspouts, again generated by powerful thunderstorms, but the type that's actually more frequent, the less severe non-supercell waterspouts. And we'll show some examples of both. Now when we talk about the characteristics of tornadoes, we're really all over the map. They can last for less than a minute. They can go on for well over 2 hours. They can move at speeds of only 5 to 10 kilometers an hour, or they can race along at speeds in excess of 80 kilometers an hour. The length of damage can be relatively short, less than a kilometer, or can be on the ground for an extensive period of time, over 150 kilometers. The width is really the key thing that we talked about earlier, that many of our Ontario tornadoes are only perhaps a couple of 100 meters wide. They can go on for long periods in some cases, but generally the width is not very large. In some more extreme cases, the Goderich tornado was 1.5 kilometers at its widest point, some tornadoes up to 2 kilometers or more in width. Also important to note that what they look like is not necessarily an indication of how powerful the winds are within that tornado. But as I've mentioned in previous years, if anybody sees any of these 3 tornadoes coming at them, I don't want anyone hanging around on the porch figuring I'm going to help Jeff out, try to figure out what EF scale this thing is. I don't need that help. We'll figure that out later. If you see any of these things coming, we're heading to the basement and riding out the storm there. Now, when we talk again about these supercells, many of them with that very impressive funnel shape. The example on the left, another shot of the Eli tornado back in 2007 in southern Manitoba. But not all supercell tornadoes have this distinct appearance. We've got one that looks a little bit more indistinct here. This was also a supercell tornado that moved through the town of Blue Mountains, did extensive damage to orchards in that area back in August of 2009 during a record-breaking tornado outbreak across southern Ontario. Now, when we talk about the second type, supercell tornadoes were moving in lockstep with that parent supercell thunderstorm, but the second type that is not dependent on supercells, the so-called landspouts, the formation mechanism is different. Their formation mechanism relies on what the winds are doing at the surface. And if there's a collision of winds from different directions that generates a circulation at ground level, that circulation can sometimes work its way up to the base of the storm, and we have a landspout tornado. They tend to be more thin and rope-like in appearance. They tend to be more at the lower end of the enhanced Fujita scale for damage, but again are nonetheless dangerous in their own right. This schematic then giving us a sense of what's happening inside that landspout tornado, the formation mechanism. Again, at the surface, the winds from different directions meeting, generating that circulation at the surface, and it works its way up to the storm cloud. As this graphic also demonstrates, and what we've talked about earlier, the visible funnel doesn't have to go all the way to the ground for it to be a tornado. If, as a spotter, we see that funnel cloud off in the distance, the next thing we want to do is look at the surface beneath it to see if we're seeing swirling dust and debris kicking up and being drawn up into the storm. And if we do, it's no longer just a funnel cloud, it's a tornado. Now, this video was filmed last August, not far from here, on Highway 402. The Delaware area, people moving along the highway saw this thing off in the distance. Initially, the tree line was obscuring what was happening in the low levels, and even later on, it's a little hard to see if it's actually in contact with the surface, but we did have some damage reported, some tree damage, and I think some barn damage from this event. I do apologize for the language in the video, but as we often find, people are a stream of consciousness, as it were, and so this was this event again from last summer.
Look at it. Holy shit. I'm not stopping.
Oh my God. Oh my
Look
God,
at it.
honey.
So at this point, just stopping it there, we can see that the funnel almost extends down, almost make it out towards the surface, but in fact there was contact with the surface at this point. As the video continues, we already start to see it break down a bit.
Holy shit.
You getting pictures of it?
I'm getting video.
I ain't stopping. There's no fucking wind?
So as the person noted, there was little wind around his vehicle. Perhaps noted somewhat more colorfully. And as we note in these cases, we've had people talk about these landspout events. I've never personally been close to one, but what people have mentioned is there's almost an eerie quiet some distance from the event. Now, as you get closer, you will still hear that roaring noise that's more familiar with larger and somewhat more powerful tornadoes, but they were a sufficient distance away that it was relatively calm where they were, and yet not that far away we had this landspout occurring. Now, because it depends on the collision of the winds to kind of steer it, not on what's happening with the parent storm, landspouts can move in a very erratic fashion. They can move sort of to the east, they can move back to the west, they can move to the south, a lot depending on what this boundary of surface winds is doing. So very dangerous in that regard because they're not easy to forecast where they're going to go. Now, when we talk about waterspouts, two main types of waterspouts. One, literally, a supercell waterspout. So it's a supercell tornado over land, and that supercell tornado moves out over a body of water, becomes a waterspout during that transition over the body of water, and then something like this can hold together, hit the land again and continue on as a tornado. So these are obviously very dangerous. They can have strong wind speeds as it moves across the body of water. Now, a weaker type, the non-supercell waterspout, don't rely on a big supercell thunderstorm. What they're relying on is warm lake temperatures. So in late August into September, when the lakes are at their warmest, we can get a cool outbreak of air above the lake. So we've got warm underneath cool, and that's a very unstable situation. And sometimes, if the conditions are right, it's not just one or two of these waterspouts forming, but families of waterspouts forming. Lake Erie tends to get most of them because it's the shallowest Great Lake and the warmest Great Lake by the time we get to late summer. Now, while these supercell type waterspouts can continue over land for some distance and be very dangerous, the non-supercell waterspouts will tend to fall apart as they come on shore because their big mechanism is the warm lake water. As soon as they come inland, there's more friction, there's cooler conditions, and they'll fall apart. But since these things can't tell us, you know, I'm a supercell waterspout, I'm a non-supercell waterspout, if we're out on the water, we see any of these things, we want to give them a wide berth to stay on the safe side. Now, in this section, we're going to briefly review some of the features that we talked about as being notable in these storms that we see from a distance. So things like overshooting tops and well-defined anvils, the dark rain curtain, shelf clouds, all of these clues to the potential severity of a storm. Really key again, and from a distance, this is a feature that we can see relatively easily, looking for that overshooting top, and looking for that overshooting top to persist for a number of minutes, thereby giving us a sense of how strong that updraft is. Another clue that we're looking at is the shape and formation of that updraft. How crunchy and bright white, bubbly, white-knuckled in appearance, cauliflower-like appearance, again indicative of how powerful that updraft actually might be. And in these series of 4 images, the trained spotter's eye should be drawn to the storms in the bottom 2 for features that we've talked about earlier this evening. Both of these thunderstorms have crisp and well-defined anvil clouds that we're seeing here, and also both exhibit a fairly buoyant or bubbling nature underneath, again indicative of that strong updraft. The storm in the lower left also has a very prominent overshooting top, so all features that, again, we've recognized from earlier this evening. Now, the storms in the top 2 maybe have some lightning associated with them, and we certainly want to have respect for that. But given their more fuzzy and indistinct appearance, the updrafts do not look as vigorous, these storms are less likely to be producing severe weather. Now, in these series of 4 images, again, the trained spotter's eye should be drawn to the bottom 2 storms for reasons that we've talked about earlier this evening. Both of these storms are exhibiting very, very intense-looking updrafts, a very bright white billowing appearance to the updrafts in both of these storms, quite significant storms. Whereas the storms in the top 2, while certainly having updrafts associated with them, the updrafts again appear to be more fuzzy, indistinct, and less vigorous, so less likely to produce severe weather. Now, when we talk about funnel clouds, the human brain is very good at pattern recognition. You will all leave here tonight, my army of CANWARN spotters, with visions of funnel clouds dancing in your head. But I will tell you right now that most of what you're going to see over the course of summer will be lookalikes or false funnels. There will be many pieces of cloud that are hanging beneath the base of a storm that look like they could be a funnel, but probably are not. The key then to be a funnel cloud is smooth appearance and obvious signs of rapid rotation. If we're not seeing that, it's very likely we're looking at a lookalike. So more ragged in appearance and no rotation. If it's safe to do so, if that storm is still some distance away, watching the feature you think is a funnel cloud for a while before sending in that report. So some examples over the last few years, very typical of the types of funnel clouds that we get here in Ontario. This one from Gore Bay on Manitoulin Island last summer. Relatively thin, a little hard to pick out from the background sky, and that can be a challenge for us as well when the coloration of the funnel is similar to the background sky. As a trained spotter, we're naturally looking underneath the funnel for any signs of swirling dust and debris, but we're not really seeing anything at this point, and it is a little bit difficult with the tree line, so this report would remain a funnel cloud at this point. And again, perhaps telling the forecaster it may be more than that, but from my vantage point, I can't make out the surface clearly. Another good example from here in southwestern Ontario a couple of years ago, again, thin rope-like funnel coming down towards the surface. There was obvious signs of rotation, but the tree line, some buildings in the distance, making it difficult to see what's happening right at the surface. So again, this report would go in as a funnel cloud, but again, mentioning that I can't actually see the surface in that area all that clearly. Yet another example where what we have is a lot of times people will zoom in on the feature, whereas what we really want to see, in addition to zooming in and confirming, yes, this is in fact a funnel, we want to pull back a bit. What's happening underneath? Is it a full-fledged tornado? Is it just a funnel cloud? We need to know what's happening at the surface to try to confirm that. So people, in their natural excitement at seeing something like this, focus in on the feature. What we want to do is then pull back and look at the bigger picture as well. Now this particular one we've used over the last few years, this funnel will be there all day long. You're driving along and you're thinking, Jeff told me to watch out for funnels. I'm watching out for funnels. I see that out of the corner of my eye. There's our dark storm cloud, and that certainly looks like a funnel to me. Yes?
You wouldn't be smoking this or anything, would you?
No, I hope not. I hope not. But what we've got again is that vaguely funnel shape. Certainly looks impressive. We look more closely and realize with that smokestack there, it's not going anywhere. Ward Kennedy sent me this shot last year. This was, again, sort of a trick of perspective. We've got sort of an ominous looking cloud on the upper left here. We've got something that looks funnel shaped, appears to be coming out of it. But it was a trick of perspective. This funnel-shaped cloud was not coming from the base of this cloud towards the ground. It was actually a jet contrail. It was horizontal. It was high in the sky, about 30 or 40,000 feet above the ground, and it was going horizontally. It wasn't going vertical. But again, trick of perspective. We see something out of the corner of our eye. We want to verify it. Is there rotation? Is it falling apart? What exactly is this thing? Now in each of these four images, and some of them look pretty scary, especially the one in the lower left here, it does bear a strong resemblance to a wedge-shaped tornado. But all four of these images are lookalikes. All four of these images are rain shafts coming out of the storm cloud. Now we've seen other examples of rain shafts during the course of the presentation, but some of these look more thin and rope-like in appearance, funnel-shaped in all of these, and again the wedge shape here. But if we watch it closely, if it's safe to do so, we notice no rotation. And in fact, in cases where it is the rain shaft, the appearance can change over time. It loses that funnel shape, it becomes more broad, and becomes more obvious that it's a rain shaft that we're dealing with. So to sum up, something that we face here in southern Ontario that we don't necessarily see in prime storm chaser country down in Oklahoma, Nebraska, or the Canadian prairies where things are very flat, we've got hilly terrain, we've got tree lines, we've got buildings that can all interfere with our ability to see the lowest part of the storm. Many of our most active days here in Ontario are the so-called 3H days, hot, hazy, and humid. And with that haze, that may obstruct the visibility in the low levels so we can't make out some of these cloud features from a distance. And as we've also talked about this evening, a number of our storms can be actually wrapped in rain. We can't see the updraft portion, we don't know what's going on in that area. And if we ever get into this situation, again, where it's wind and rain and maybe some hail, we can't see much anyways, and we don't know what could be coming from that storm. So we want to be taking shelter. Now in this section, we're going to review ways to stay on top of the weather. I'm going to suggest a few websites and weather applications, but there are hundreds out there to choose from. All of this to say, it's an opportunity for you to stay on top of the weather. On a day where you're getting information from Environment Canada or other sources that it could be an active weather day, you now have the means through your smartphone, your tablet, your computer at home to track the weather as it goes on and maybe to pay more attention to the sky if the storms are approaching. We'll give you ways to report in, how we want to get those reports, and also what we want to get reports of. Now all of this information I'll be including in a handout that I've sent out in previous years, a one-pager that basically reinforces the type of weather we'd like to get reports on all year round and the ways that you can send those reports in. So staying on top of the weather, the science has improved to a great extent in my 3+ decades with Environment Canada in terms of our ability to recognize the ingredients that we need and where those ingredients could be coming together. Now unfortunately, it's still a relatively broad area. It's saying that could be a prime area for strong storms, and the storms themselves may be much smaller and much more difficult to pinpoint. So the ingredients could be coming together. We may again be sending statements out to that effect, and that allows CANWARN trained spotters in their own right to start monitoring the conditions. So as a spotter, we're not necessarily saying you need to dedicate an X number of hours to do this, but you may find organically, as you get more familiar with following the weather, that you're doing this more naturally, it's part of your day, and it becomes quite easy to do. We're looking and paying attention to the sky during the course of the day, and we note that by about 10 in the morning, we're already getting the puffy cotton ball cumulus clouds forming. And what that's telling us is our ingredients are there. We have moisture, we have instability, and we have lift, but at the current time, we don't have a lot of vertical extent, and these clouds aren't really much of a concern. But as the day progresses, if the clouds become fewer in number and higher in vertical extent, well, there's consolidation going on. So there's fewer clouds, there's more energy available to those clouds, and they may be growing more substantially. On days like this, the weather office may decide to issue a watch by late in the morning or early in the afternoon, and that watch may say there may be some showers around right now, some non-severe thunderstorms around right now, but in the next 3 or 4 hours, we expect the possibility of severe thunderstorms in the area. And radar. A number of ways that you can track the radar now in your area. We'll touch on some of them in a moment, but that's also a great clue that initially in the day, by early afternoon, some weak showers are showing up in the area, but as the day progresses, as we check back on the radar later on in the afternoon, now we're getting more severe storm cells. We can see where they are, see how they're moving, and see if our area could be affected. So Intellicast, an excellent website that's allowing us to put together a lot of weather information across a broad geographic area, or we can zoom right in. So for winter-type storms, knowing that most of our weather moves from west to east, we can use something like Intellicast that's bringing in all the Canadian radars, all the US radars onto one seamless map that we can zoom in and out of. The green shades, the yellow shades, the oranges and reds, all intensity of liquid precipitation, of rainfall. The pink shades that we see sometimes on these images, mixed precipitation, rain mixed with snow or freezing rain. And then the blue shades, areas of snow. So in the winter, when we're expecting a big winter storm to come in, you'd be able to use something like this to track the progression of that storm as it gets closer. Now, it doesn't just give us radar on this interactive weather map. We can seamlessly move over to satellite imagery and look at the cloud patterns and how they're moving and changing with time. We can then throw another layer of data on here. Where are the current watches and warnings in effect across North America? So at the current time, there could be a storm system near Chicago. The National Weather Service may have statements on that storm, and you've been tracking the radar, and it's actually showing the storms are coming towards southern Ontario. So you can anticipate that Environment Canada may be following suit in the coming hours and issuing our own statements on that weather. So you've got a series of map layers on this interactive map that you can turn off and on to pull out different types of information. All totally free. The change is made to the map instantaneous once you click on the different field that you want. Another great source for current conditions, the Wonder Map on weatherunderground.com, on wonderground.com. So a series of people with their own weather stations on their properties sharing that information with the Weather Underground. They plot it. And again, you can zoom into your backyard, get more stations plotted. You can zoom out and get the big picture. Temperature information, wind information, precipitation information, all available. So both Intellicast and Weather Underground are a great source for the here and now when it comes to weather. A relatively new site that's actually quite mesmerizing. I'm going to have to break out of the presentation to show you what the site actually looks like because the screen capture does not do it justice. WindyTV.com is a new generation of websites that is showing model information, the future. Along the bottom of the map, you've got a time scale that you can go out 7-8 days into the future and see what the weather is going to be like in your area. You can zoom in on the map, you can zoom out on the map. Certainly the weather models are not super accurate once you get to day 5, 6, or 7, but it certainly gives you a sense of what you could be dealing with. The danger of this site for a meteorologist is that I've been known to get stuck watching this site for long periods of time and not doing what I'm supposed to be doing at work. So what you've got is everything moving. And anybody who ever wondered, is air a fluid like water, just has to go to this site to see. It defaults to the wind field occurring right now. So the model's 0-hour forecast, if you will, what's happening right now. The brighter the shades of green and orange, the stronger the surface winds, and the bluer or duller shades, weaker winds. Now that's great, that's Thursday, that's right now, but I can take my sliding scale and go to Sunday, and instantaneously I get what it's going to look like on Sunday. If I want to get a sense of what it's going to happen early next week, we can go to Wednesday of next week, and we get the wind patterns there. And this is just the wind pattern, that's just one field. You can play around with, I said, precipitation, with temperature, with a whole variety of fields. So what we're seeing with this new generation of websites is a way for more people with an interest in weather to consume this model information. It's not in these difficult graphics that only meteorologists can use. It's in a much more usable format that pretty much anyone can use. And a very dangerous site, as I said, for those of us interested in weather. Smartphone applications. New applications coming out pretty much every day for Android phones and Apple phones and Windows phones and whatever Blackberries are left out there, including mine. Radar scope, still a little bit of money involved, a small monthly fee in US dollars or a small yearly fee to access a range of radar information. Meteo, a good example of a new generation of third parties taking Environment Canada information but making it more visually pleasing and easier to use on your phone. So Meteo is free, and what they ask for is patrons to send donations in to keep them going. Another neat feature of Meteo, and right now it's only available on the Apple App Store, but a neat feature of Meteo is you can ask for push alerts to be sent to your phone or your tablet, and they, as soon as Environment Canada sends them, Meteo processes them and puts them out onto your phone in a push sense. Storm is the application version of the Intellicast website. A lot of powerful information about radar on this site as well. And what's nice about the Storm application is if you've got your GPS turned on your tablet or on your phone, it automatically centers the radar image right where you are. And you can see what's happening in your neighborhood, then you can blow it out, you can zoom it in. A lot of powerful stuff. And again, these are just 3 examples of the myriad number of sites that are out there. Whatever you find to use that is easiest for you is basically the best. There's no one app that I can recommend that's going to be better, perhaps, than others. You can experiment and find them, but all of these things allowing you to track the weather. And again, not just in your backyard, but what's happening further to the west, something that may be coming. EC Alert Me, again, available to a select group right now. This is a prototype we've had for the last few years. EC Alert Me available to CANWARN spotters, to the media, to emergency managers and responders. There is going to be a public version of EC Alert Me available later on this summer. Until that time, you can go to this website, and I'll be sending this website out with the list of websites and books that I send out in the next few weeks. You go to the site, you give it your email address, you create your alert region of interest around your area where you live, and then you tell the system which alerts you want to receive, all the alerts or just the summer alerts or just the winter alerts, what have you, and you'll get that email sent to you within minutes of the original warning being sent by Environment Canada. So another tool to stay on top of the situation as statements are being issued so you feel more involved in the weather situation. Yes?
Do they send out texts as well?
No, right now it's only an email. So what I've got is sort of a combination of alerting, Meteo sending me pop-ups to my phone. I'm getting the emails this way. There's a variety of ways. There may actually be providers out there that do it in a text format, but I'm not aware of them. But certainly that's a possibility. Alert Ready. 2 years ago, the CRTC ruled that broadcast media, television and radio, must interrupt their broadcasts for things that pose an immediate risk to life or property in Canada. There's a number of reasons that Alert Ready could be used. Environment Canada participates in the program, and right now it's tornado warnings that interrupt the radio broadcasts and the television broadcasts to let you know that one is in effect for your area. But the full gamut of Alert Ready through local authorities, provincial authorities, and other federal departments could be issued for things like forest fires or industrial fires, people that may have to evacuate, boil water advisories, the release of hazardous materials, anything which again poses that imminent risk to life or property is something that Alert Ready can eventually be used for, and a number of different agencies at different levels of government can feed the Alert Ready system with that information. And weather radio, it's low tech, it's been around forever, but it's still reliable. VHF transmissions, 7 frequencies that are used in the US and in Canada. We'll be giving away in the draw one of these weather radios. We talked earlier about nocturnal storms, things happening at 2 or 3 in the morning. You may be woken out of a sound sleep. Well, If a tornado warning is issued in the overnight hours, the weather radio will emit a piercing tone, kind of like a smoke alarm for weather, and that would sort of reinforce the idea that there could be bad storms in your area, and if your house is starting to rattle and roll, another good reason to get into the basement. Now for reporting protocols, we have a number of different ways. There's a number of amateur radio operators in the audience this evening. They can start up a network controlled by someone called a network controller. That person would do a sort of a roll call to see who else is available in the area to watch the sky over the coming hours, collect that information, and decide which reports should be passed along to the Weather Center. If you're not involved in amateur radio, then we've got 3 other methods to get information into Environment Canada. The preferred method, and this was after doing a poll of the forecasters after the last number of years, email is the preferred method to get most reports in. The advantage of email in the Weather Center is it doesn't interrupt their workflow, because the emails come in, it makes a noise on the PC, they know there's a report, they can glide over, look at the email, maybe the embedded picture, and go back to doing what they were doing. Now, unfortunately, we currently have a pretty straightforward email address, storm.ontario@ec.gc.ca, and that's going to live for another maybe year. But after that, it's going to be replaced by this incredibly long and unmemorable email address, which we are currently lobbying Treasury Board, since they're the folks that have come up with the way to create generic email addresses in the government. We'd like to use something like storm.ontario@canada.ca. Right now, again, we're still negotiating that. If that changes, I'll be letting CANWARN folks know over the course of the coming months. Next after email would be Twitter. If you include the hashtag ONStorm in your report, and again, you can use pictures in that tweet, that's another preferred method. The phone line is number 3, can still be used, but should probably be used for the most dangerous, the most significant events, because the phone line is answered live 24/7. There's no voicemail. So it could pull away the forecaster from doing something else to have to answer the phone and go through the report. So still there, still available, but email and Twitter are the preferred methods for most reports. Now, within the amateur radio community, there are 3 condition codes that are gone through in some cases in some events as the event begins or ratchets up. Condition code green, when the first severe thunderstorm watch is issued for the area, doesn't necessarily mean there's any severe storms around just yet, so a bit of a calm before the storm, and that gives the network controller time to find out how many other amateur radio operators in the area are available to participate on the net on that day and where they're located. Condition code yellow, we've now moved into a severe thunderstorm warning or tornado watch, a higher percentage that there will be severe storms, and condition code red, we move into a tornado warning situation in the area. Now, regardless of whether you're reporting in through an amateur radio or email, Twitter, or the phone line, we're looking for this kind of information in the report. And again, I'll include this information in the one-pager I send out about what to report and how to report. Identifying yourself, mentioning that you're CANWARN trained. If you know your CANWARN ID number, you can provide it. If not, it's not a big deal. Where you are as precisely as possible and where you are in relation to what you're reporting is important. What you want to report on. And a really important one is when the event happened. Is it happening right now as we speak, or did this event happen 20, 30 minutes ago? And if it did happen some time ago, it's important to tell the forecaster that so he or she can backtrack on radar to see what was over your location at that time. Movement, if you know it, came from the west and was moving east, and your confidence level. When we talk about funnel cloud sightings, there can be some level of uncertainty, and there's nothing wrong with telling the forecaster in the email or what have you. I think about 60-70% chance it's a real funnel cloud. I'm not quite sure. If it's a hail report and you've had some big hailstones from a storm, you've gone out after the hail has stopped, you've picked one of the biggest hailstones up, you've measured it, it's a 6-centimeter diameter hailstone, obviously the confidence level is much higher. And now I fully understand the exuberance of a lot of people sending in their first report, but I do have to say one of our reports this year from a storm earlier this spring from a CANWARN spotter in southwestern Ontario talked about toonie-sized hail, which is big hail. It's severe hail. It would demand a warning being issued. But this was a report that came in on a day when the forecasters thought only pea-sized hail would result, non-severe hail. So in order to get confirmation of the toonie-sized hail, they asked the spotter, could you send us a picture showing us an example of the hail? Well, the person sent the picture in, and it was basically a bunch of pea-sized hail. in his hand. So again, this idea of maybe it looks bigger than it was, I look at it, we really want to get precise as possible in the reports because it can mean the difference between having to issue a warning and not. So even CANWARN spotters can get excited, but again, the credibility is usually higher than what we're getting from social media, where we're not quite sure where the source of the report is coming from. Now, what to report? We've had people who have been a part of the CANWARN program for a number of years, and they've never had to actually send in any reports whatsoever. Nothing wrong with that. It just means that what we want to get reports on are still events that are relatively rare. But if you encounter big hail, the size of a nickel or larger, or extensive hail that covers the whole ground, or any damage that hail has caused, that's worth reporting. Heavy rain is worth reporting, but not just a good downpour. We're talking about rain that's caused impacts. Culverts overflowing their banks, roads have been flooded out, you've got basement flooding. That's worth reporting. Damaging winds when the damage is becoming tangible. So if it's really blowing hard out there and your tree is wobbling back and forth, but it's still upright or it's still at least in one piece, not worth reporting. But if shingles are being torn off, if large branches are coming off, if the damage is more severe, I mean, one of our reports years ago came out of Peterborough, and the report was of flying canoes. That's worth reporting. When you got a stack of canoes in your property and they're whizzing by your head, that's something we'd like to hear about. When it comes to funnel clouds, water spouts, and tornadoes, again, it can be a little bit more problematic. If we're not sure, if we can watch that situation to try to verify it. If we're still not sure, but we'd like to report it, again, giving a sense of our confidence level of the report. This is where I am, this is where I'm looking. I think I'm seeing rotation. It does look like a funnel cloud, but always remembering if the weather deteriorates at your location, you have to take shelter. The primary consideration is your safety. Other times of the year, outside of summer severe weather, if you're experiencing very dense fog with very poor visibilities, any occurrence of freezing precipitation, heavily accumulating snow, whiteout conditions in snow and blowing snow, or the rapid freeze up of road surfaces. So it's been raining at 5 degrees Celsius, the cold front's gone through, now the temperature's plummeted to -4, and that rain is now becoming ice out on the sidewalks and roadways. That's worth reporting. Again, the preferred methods, email and Twitter, and I'd only be using the phone line in an extreme case of significant weather outside of the summer months. COCORAS, for those of you that want to take your weather volunteering to the next level. CANWARN, not really expecting you to change your lifestyle too much, maybe pay more attention to the sky, use your weather apps a little bit more, but COCORAS actually looking for people willing to observe rainfall and snowfall each morning at 7 in the morning and send in a report of how much rain or snow has fallen in that 24 hours between 7 a.m. and 7 a.m. COCORAS website, I'll include in the list of websites for those of you that want to check the site out and get more information. I'd also recommend contacting your local conservation authority. If you live in an area that's a gap for them that they currently don't get observations from, some conservation authorities have paid for the rain gauge for people to become part of the COCORAS network. So it is worth checking out with your conservation authority if you're thinking about doing this. We've seen some examples from earlier this evening, the Windsor flooding from last year, the Burlington event from back in 2014. The highest amounts in both of those cases came from a COCORAS volunteer. Again, localized weather events occurring between where we have weather observation sites, and so these volunteer gauges can become very important. Now, the last section that we're going to talk about is weather safety. And the reason it's left to last is because I consider these next dozen or so slides to be the most important slides in the presentation. When we talk about lightning safety, we've already mentioned that we're only going to be issuing watches and warnings for a small fraction of all the thunderstorms that we get each year, but every single thunderstorm has the ability to kill you with the lightning it possesses. Another concern is that that first lightning strike can occur in your area with very little advance notice, and that's why using some of the information we're going to see in the coming slides can become very important. So I'd like you to watch this video, and I'd like you to keep an eye on this utility pole right here and see what happens to it. So we've got a utility pole that becomes toothpicks. Here's slow motion. Anybody that ever doubted the power of lightning, I think this video is pretty instructive. Now, the other thing to note too is that when we talk about lightning danger, lightning in many cases is looking for the shortest path between the base of the cloud and the ground. So tall, pointy, isolated objects can be struck by lightning. It's not a question of being made out of metal. Lightning is not attracted to metal. This pole was made of wood. Hilltops get struck, chimneys get struck by lightning. So again, this idea of tall, pointy, isolated objects. And even if you are not the direct object hit by the lightning, if you were close enough to this pole, there's something called a side flash, where the original lightning strike hits the object, but some of the power of that lightning strike goes sideways off the object, and if you're close enough to it, you can be injured or killed by that side flash. It was, in fact, a side flash that killed that young co-ed at Waterloo University a few years ago. She was walking along a path. The lightning struck a tree next to the path, and a side flash came over and killed her. Last year, we also had the tragedy of the man in Tilsonburg on his riding lawnmower. I think thought he had time to make one more pass with the riding lawnmower, and it was actually a bolt of lightning coming out of the front of the storm that killed him. A lot of folks assume I have to be underneath the thunderstorm to be at risk of being struck by lightning. And what we're going to see in the coming slides is lightning can occur all around the storm to distances out to 15, 16, 17 kilometers away and be deadly. So even before the storm arrives, there's danger, and even after the storm departs, there's still danger. So the lightning safety rule says when thunder roars, go indoors. Very straightforward. It doesn't say when thunder roars, have a family meeting under a tree and have a vote. Bobby, did you hear the thunder? Do you think we should take shelter? Majority rules, that's not the case. If you hear the thunder, go indoors. Now, over the course of my life, I've been a coach for my kids, baseball and soccer back in the 90s. I've had people tell me, well, I heard the thunder, but I didn't see any lightning, so I'm not going anywhere. They didn't seem to understand that it was the lightning that caused the thunder. Even if you don't see it, if you hear the thunder, the lightning that caused that thunder is close enough to be dangerous. Even so, many folks do get the message. When thunder roars, they are heading for shelter, and that's a good thing. The second part of the rule says, remain in the shelter you found for a full 30 minutes after the last rumble of thunder. So if the storm goes on for 2 hours, we want you in that shelter for 2 hours and 30 minutes. Now, both my 28-year-old and 30-year-old sons feel psychologically scarred by some of the episodes they had with their weatherman father when they were younger, because we were always the last ones to get out of the car after these storms went by. There would be situations where we'll wait 15 minutes, there's been no more thunder or lightning, that's great. Then we hear another rumble of thunder, I set my stopwatch back to 0, we have to wait another 30 minutes. Now, there's a method to my madness. Aside from following the lightning safety rule, I promised my wife of over 30 years that I would not be killed by lightning. And the reason for that is I would be dead, killed by the lightning. She would be the widow of the semi-famous weatherman who got killed by lightning. And she would have to live with the shame of that for the rest of her life. So to protect my wife from shame, I am the biggest scaredy cat there is when it comes to lightning. I have been laughed at my tennis club as I ran off the court. We've got a whole bunch of metal fencing around us. There's rumbles of thunder and guys keep playing, no big deal. I have to get off the courts to protect my wife's reputation. So again, full 30 minutes after the last rumble of thunder. Why are we doing this? Well, as we said, the storm can move by. You can have starry skies or blue skies above you. The storm has moved off to the east, and that was the case here a couple of summers ago. David Piano on the shoreline in Burlington on the west end of Lake Ontario. The storm had moved over Burlington and moved out over the lake. As it was actually fairly far into the lake, a bolt came out the back end of the storm cloud, traveled back where the storm had already been, 15 kilometers, and hit the shoreline in Burlington. That's why we wait the 30 minutes. We want to give that storm time to get away from us so that we're out of the danger zone of a bolt coming out the back end of the storm. In terms of lightning safety, our best area to be is a well-constructed building. We want to stay away from exterior windows and doors. Again, metal framing around there, if the building is struck, could conduct the charge. And we don't want to talk on a landline phone because we're hanging onto a piece of the phone wire of the house. If the house is struck, it can flow along the phone wires and you're hanging onto a piece of it. If there is no building nearby, a car or truck will provide lightning protection, but it should have a metal roof because it's actually the metal cage of the vehicle around us that's giving us a lightning protection, not the rubber tires. We used to teach the lightning safety crouch. If there was no car nearby, no building nearby, Find a low-lying area away from tall, pointy, isolated objects and crouch down. Don't lie down if lightning is the main concern, because then there's more of you touching the ground, and if lightning strikes nearby, you could be affected. If you're crouching down, it's only the balls of your feet that are touching the ground. But what they realized was people were thinking that that sort of made them safe by crouching down. And they had a vehicle not too far away, they had a building not too far away. So the strong encouragement now is if you've got something, even if it's a distance away, even if you have to walk across that open field to get to it, and you're the tallest thing around, make for the building, make for the vehicle, don't stay outside. No place outside is safe, and that includes screened-in porches, not safe. It includes tents, not safe. It includes garages with the garage door open and having a pop while you're watching the storm, not safe. All of these things, you need a well-constructed building, or you need that metal skin around you to truly have protection from the lightning. If you're on the water in an open cockpit craft like a canoe, a sea-doo, a raft, or a boat with no cabin, it's like saying, "Lord, take me now." You're in a bad place, in an open boat, you are the tallest thing around on a flat surface, very, very dangerous. Now, in these situations, we want to make for shore, and we don't want to stick around on the shoreline because we're still the tallest thing around. We want to get inland to a vehicle, to a building. That's where the safety is. Now, in larger vessels, we've got the big mast of the sailboat pointing up into the sky, a natural lightning rod, but if we install some cabling that runs from the mast into the engine housing or the keel, we're giving a path for that lightning to flow that doesn't include the cabin area where the people are taking shelter. So in the same way the metal cage of the vehicle provided protection, so would the rigging around this boat, allowing that lightning a path to follow. And we had it up during the course of this evening. We've been watching the storms. In fact, the last of the storms now seem to be dying down on this site. If we take a quick look at it, this is our latest lightning information. So lightningmaps.org is giving us real-time lightning. You can zoom out and look at all of North America, or you can zoom right in and look at our neck of the woods. As new lightning occurs, we get a little ping showing up here, these little white circles that ping out, showing where the lightning is occurring. Now, if this had been around for me back in the 90s when I was coaching, I would have been a lot less frustrated. A lot easier to convince people if they can see where this stuff is. So, very powerful, totally free. And if you leave the website up on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, your computer, it automatically updates continuously with new information. You can track the storms. This is a way to guarantee you're not putting yourself at risk. On a day when you're planning outdoor family activities where Environment Canada has mentioned a risk of a thunderstorm, they may not be severe, but there could be lightning around. You can start tracking the storms early in the day on lightningmaps.org. And if some of those strikes start to get close, you can start getting closer to your safety area. Okay, now if the concern is more than just lightning, if these storms now are capable of producing damaging bursts of wind or tornadoes, well-built structure is still our best place to be. Now we want to be on the lowest level of that structure, a basement if there is one, main floor if there isn't. If we're in a multi-story building and we get to lower floors or the storm is upon us already, we want to get to the core of the building. The key rule of thumb in these cases is put as many walls as you can between you and the outside. So out in the hallway, bad. This room, better. That corridor, best. Multiple walls. If I get debris smashing into the exterior walls, bringing that stuff in, I've got one level of protection, two levels of protection. Even better, the washroom, small enclosed area. Again, more walls between me and the outside. Shopping malls, arenas, and gymnasiums, all dangerous places to be. They have wide-span roofs. If those roofs are ripped off or partially ripped off by the winds or the tornado, the walls can collapse inwards. Now, as we said in previous years, Jeff, I'm already in the shopping mall. The tornado's in the parking lot. Do you honestly want me to leave the shopping mall to go where the tornado is? No. We're going to stay in the shopping mall because that's where you are, and we're going to make the best of a not great situation by moving into the core of the shopping mall, away from any skylights, preferably into a washroom or a smaller enclosed area, and ride out the storm there. As we've shown in previous years, this gymnasium in Henryville, Indiana, graphic evidence of what happens to these larger span structures when they're struck by a tornado. Now, school was in session when this tornado hit the high school, but Indiana's in Tornado Alley. They run regular drills, and they know even though we can get lots of kids and teachers into the gym, we're not sending them there during a severe thunderstorm. We're in the main school building, we're crouched down in the main corridors, in the core of the school building, and we're avoiding what could have been a tragedy as we see here. Wind forces outside are increasing, the doors start to flap as the tornado approaches. When the tornado strikes the gym, and again this is real time, not time lapse, we're losing power, and then Mother Nature brings in natural light. She flattens one wall, takes off most of the roof, and when the dust starts to settle, we see that what was once a gymnasium has become literally a slaughterhouse, where people would have been injured or killed if they were inside it by falling debris and by the debris that's spinning around because of those winds. And this is how quickly that can happen. It was about 10 seconds for that gym to be destroyed by this powerful tornado. Now, if you're outside at the campsite, I have no good advice for you whatsoever. Said this over the years, we're making the best of a bad situation. If there is no well-constructed building nearby, we're looking for what's better than my soft-sided tent. Soft-sided tent, zero protection. Is there a cabin or cottage nearby, or am I staying in a cabin or cottage? Great. I'm going to use the middle of that structure to shelter in. It's not as good as a well-constructed building, but it's better than being outside or in the tent. Campground washrooms, better than your tent, but many of these are not constructed very soundly, so again would still not be a guarantee of safety. Your vehicle, if it's nearby, but the problem with the vehicle is if we're near the tree line and there's lots of tall trees, some of them can come down and crush the vehicle. So if we can, we're trying to move the vehicle away from the tallest trees to be somewhat safer. If there's absolutely no protection whatsoever, no vehicle, no washrooms, no cabin or cottage, we still need to get out of that tent. And we had a tragedy last summer, a 39-year-old woman and a 13-year-old boy killed in Quetico Provincial Park west of Thunder Bay on the border with Minnesota. The storm happened at 3 in the morning. It was pitch black outside. It hit a tree nearby. A large branch came off the tree, fell onto the tent, killed the woman and child outright, and injured 2 others that were in the tent. Now, as counterintuitive as it may sound, I'm leaving whatever shelter I've got, in this case, to look for at least a low-lying area, perhaps an area away from the tallest trees. So if the trees do start coming down, I may be injured, but I might be surviving the event. And the key, again, is to stay low. Lightning safety rule talked about crouching if you had no shelter to minimize your surface area on the ground. If you're worried about flying debris, we're not crouching anymore, we're lying flat and let that debris fly over us. So again, not a great situation, not a lot of good choices. So the advice in these cases is when you arrive at the campsite and the birds are chirping and the sun is shining and the kids are laughing and playing, that's when you come up with your plan. If something bad were to happen, where would we go? This is what we do. You tell the kids, this is what we do. You make sure every camper has a flashlight handy at night so they can help orient themselves. Okay. And again, the idea here is scope out your surroundings when it's quiet, when the adrenaline's not pumping, when people aren't screaming, and especially if it's an overnight storm, if you've got that plan, if you've got the flashlight, we can get the kids together, this is what we're going to do, this is where we're going to go, and again, there's no guarantees, but it's better than being passive, staying in that tent, and hoping the storm's going to miss. Now, I included the video this year. This was a tornado in Utah. This was a man driving home from work. He had the dashboard cam going. This is what happens with a close encounter with windborne debris. Killed by that flying debris. This is the concern. The powerful winds are one thing, but what those winds have picked up and what they're throwing around is what injures and kills. Last 2 videos to finish up, videos that we started using a couple of years ago. Again, the dangers of taking shelter underneath an overpass on a highway. It looks like a good shelter. I've got nowhere else to go. What am I going to do? I'm going to park under the overpass, but it's a very dangerous place to be, because the winds can funnel and become stronger underneath the overpass, and it's also an area where debris can collect, and you're actually putting yourself more at risk. If you can get off the highway, find a Timmy's, find some place that you can shelter in, that's your best bet. As a last resort, again, pulling away from the overpass, getting out of the vehicle if you think it's going to be really bad, getting into that ditch or something. Not a lot of good choices, again, on the highway, but the overpass is not a good one. Now, as we've said when this video is played in the last few years, I don't know what excites this guy in real life, but during the course of the video, he speaks in a calm fashion. There's no four-letter words. Again, it's just, maybe he's in shock, I don't know, but this is his video.
Crazy.
Massive EF4
Ridiculous.
tornado.
Oh, that is scary. The truck is, oh my gosh. Holy smokes. Oh no. Yeah, that is completely crazy. The truck feels like it's about to lift up off the ground. Not lying. Oh my gosh. Ooh, look at that.
There's the overpass that he's parked
I
under.
know.
Now again, if that tornado had passed a little closer to his truck, EF4 can easily pick that truck up and throw it. He's seriously injured or he's dead. If that tornado had had more significant debris as it crossed the interstate, it would have been pelting the vehicle with that debris again. He could have been seriously injured or killed. Now, the concern in the video is the passive nature. We're not doing anything to save our lives here. And we're saying, well, what would we do? Well, as a minimum, I try to back up out of that overpass to get away from the tornado, get away from it, move farther away. If I can't do that safely, or if someone's parked in behind me underneath the overpass, at a minimum, I'm getting out of the truck and I'm running the other way as fast as I can. There's no guarantee this thing was going to stay that distance away. It could have come closer. And again, I've got debris flying around. I've got suction that could take that vehicle off the ground. We want to take some charge of our own safety. And the last video of the evening, we talked earlier about the power of water, fast-flowing water, water on roadways. If we don't know how deep the water is, if we don't know the condition of the roadbed underneath, the flash flood safety rule says turn around, don't drown. Now this motorcyclist, I guess trying out his new GoPro camera, decided to ignore that advice, and we'll see what happened to him in this video. So don't be a hero. Now we're going to hear the National Weather Service weather radio broadcast.
The National Weather Service in Denver has issued a flash flood warning. Heavy rainfall will cause extensive and severe flooding of creeks, streams, roads, and culverts. This is a life-threatening situation. If you encounter flood waters, turn around, don't drown.
So this is a life-threatening situation. If you encounter floodwaters, turn around, don't drown. So this would be a good time to turn around. We don't turn around. We make some headway at first, but now the water is going to start to get deeper and the flow is going to get stronger. It's going to be harder to keep the bike upright. So now we're down. Force of the water has knocked us down. We're hung onto the bike though for dear life, and we're going to try to get the bike upright, get it going again, and get us out of here. We see the power of the water dragging it along. We can't quite get the bike back up. And now he's down to stay. He can't hang on to the bike. The bike is ripped out of his hands. There it goes. And now he becomes a human flume rider, bouncing along, hitting trees, branches, being swept along by the power of the water. So he did survive this event, but again, we get to see the power of water in these cases. It's very strong. We had tragedies a year ago in the state of Texas, people driving into some of these what were dry riverbeds beforehand became raging torrents after these strong thunderstorms, carried away in their vehicles by the power of the water and drowned. So turn around, don't drown if you're not sure. So this is the end of the presentation. I want to thank all of you for coming out. Thank you.